Hello guys, it's Fireside Chess coming back to you with another YouTube video. Today, our video is going to be focusing on the opening, and I'm simply just going to be giving you guys 10 tips that anybody can use on whatever their level is just to get better at the opening. It's just that specifically. And the reason I'm doing this sort of video rather than what I do normally is because as of lately I've been doing a lot of tactics videos, so I thought why not, it's a good idea to switch it up. So, without further ado, let's get started. So first thing that you want to do, like even when you start learning chess, is that you want to learn about the squares e4, d4, d5, and e5. These are the four center squares, or as the study calls it, the central boxes. But these are the three squares where when you have complete and total control over these, it makes the game so much easier. So first, you want to make sure that you're controlling and fighting for those four squares, d4, e4, d5, and e5. And you need to make sure that your moves in the very beginning are just quickly trying to control these four squares. Because, for example, when I played e4, we're occupying e4 and attacking on d5. And some other options could be something like knight to f3. It's not very popular, but it still ends up controlling e5 and d4. But it looks like this study is preferring e4 over any other move. And next, we have to develop our pieces. When we develop our pieces, that simply means getting them off the 8th rank or giving them the ability to do so. So if we were to play e4, like again I played, we have the ability to bring out our queen. We're not going to be doing that much, but it will be there if we have to play it. This also opens up the bishop on f1. It gives that some more opportunity to move. And even more moves that there is could be like knight to f3. And here it says complying with the development rules are develop your knights before bishops. That's a good rule because knights end up actually controlling more squares at one time. Because like say if a bishop comes to c4, here it ends up only controlling one square. Whereas bringing like a knight, that ends up controlling two. Now if black plays knight to c6 defending that pawn, we can simply develop our bishop. And now the e-pawn controls d5, our bishop, and our bishop controls d5. We have some pretty good development. Next, obviously, we want to work on our queen side and trying to bring out the rest of our pieces. And next, you want to castle your king quickly, or just make sure that your king is nice and secure. But one thing that you want to avoid when you're securing your king is that you don't want to actually just like completely hole it up and give it nowhere to go, because that can actually lead to lots of different smothered mates. And when like white or black starts to get an attack on the opponent and the opponent has just all of the pieces hugging around the king can't go anywhere. And it's almost like if a single piece moves, the entire defense can fall apart. So generally, the more popular way to defend the king is by simply doing a castle. That's simply because if we come back here, after we castle, the rook is defending the f2 pawn, or in black's case, it ends up defending the f7 pawn, which were white's weakest squares because it only had the king's defense, but it's no longer the case. And these three pawns, as long as they don't move at all, they'll also serve the king greatly in keeping it nice and secure. So the next tip is don't move your queen in the opening. This is a little bit more of like an obscure one that not a lot of at least beginning level players know, because moving your king your queen very early in the opening ends up leading for your opponent to have opportunities like stuff like bishop to b3, because now this early in the game almost every piece is defended. So it's very hard to pick off free pieces, and if so, you need to do some very complicated tactics or some pretty simple tactics that, like what we see in the Ruy Lopez, where the bishop takes the knight and then the knight takes the pawn. But here, this knight can just play to c3, attacking the queen, and this ends up giving white a tempo actually, and a tempo just simply means like an extra move in a game, because we're developing a piece, which is good, and we're forcing black to waste a move by defending the queen. And again, we can get one more tempo by playing bishop to f3, and we can get yet another tempo by playing d4. And you also might ask, well, why only d4, right? Oh, I have to do this again. Okay, well, why only d4? Why not d5? The problem with d5 is that it actually ends up blocking the bishop. So after we play d4, the queen comes to g4. And again, let's think. What different options do we have here? We do have h3, and that is the correct move. Because even though it is opening up a pawn, which is like going to be in front of the king once the king actually castles, it's still worth it because this does sort of like negate a back rank checkmate, but it is like more recommended to play like pawn to h3 right before it happens, just so you don't waste like a move like that. And again, let's get one last tempo, and I guess that's not it. We can play one more move and get one more tempo. So let's see. Again, we just want to attack the queen. So we can play actually knight to e5, simply because it ends up attacking on f7, d5, and most importantly, the queen. And one more is we're in move number 6, and black has done nothing but waste time with this queen. Fair point. All black has been doing is just running away. And white has just slowly been developing his pieces and getting more tempos, just making the game easier and easier. Because here, white already has like a 2-move lead in development, almost 3, where black hasn't even started it. So again, don't move your queens in the opening. You will get punished, at least on a higher level. And tip 5. Don't move a ton of pawns in the opening. One of the maxims from like great grandmasters is that you should only move pawns that help in development, winning a piece, or defending a piece. Those are the only pawns you should be moving. So if you see somebody play like a random pawn to h4 for no reason, then they're not following like the actual, not really rules, but the guidelines, and there is a good chance that will come back and bite them later. So as we can see here, even though we don't want to move too many pawns in the opening, moving pawns in the opening is still pretty vital, so we can bring out our bishops and also to control the center. And again, if we think about it, only move pawns that help in development or gaining material or getting a tactical advantage, we can still play d4. Some people think that this might be a little bit of a waste, but having double pawns in the center is so very, very strong. And now with both pawns out of the way, developing the bishops is very easy, but it is recommended that you develop your knights before your bishops. So we end up developing our knights, and now we develop our bishops, regardless of what happens. And as we can see here, black hasn't been very productive, only just making useless, stupid pawn moves, and not starting his development whatsoever. And now we have already castled, and black hasn't even moved his knight off of the 8th rank. And again, don't move the same piece twice in the opening. So here, let's say if we play e4, d4. Then we play knight to f3, and then pawn to c4. This is simply just the queen's gambit. Pawn to e3, pawn takes, bishop here. And black has ended up doing it. Black has moved the same piece twice in the opening. You're not supposed to do that. Mostly because this ends up wasting a move and giving your opponent a chance to finish their development before you. But the only time when you should be doing this is when you absolutely have to, you're gonna lose a piece, or you are going to completely have a tactical disadvantage. Anyway, we just continue with the opening. And again, black does it again. Queen goes back to d8, and now we can steadily finish our development. And again, third time, move 8, and all black has done is just moving the same piece over and over again. And if we actually rewind it, every time the same piece is moved, there's actually a red arrow. If we see this, and then this, here the pawn is moved, but it's only really, it is moved twice because it is moved to d6 then d5. Okay, the knight is moved for the first time. We have pawn. Knight moves in. That's not recommended. You're not supposed to move it twice in a row. But after we take the pawn, the queen takes. Bishop here. Knight moves back. Again, moving it one more time. Not good. Developing the knight. And again, this actually ties in with tip number 4. Don't move the queen in the opening, because now black can get tempos on you, and or even your opponent, not black or white. Just anybody can get a tempo on you if you end up bringing your queen out in the opening, and you're giving them tempos anyway if you're moving the same piece more than once. But we continue with their castling. Now tip number 7. Place your queen behind your pawns. And here the little blurb says, tip number 7 that you should take into account when playing chess openings well is to place the queen behind the pawn line. That is, if you're playing with the white pieces, your queen should be positioned on row 2, and if you play as black, she must be positioned on row 7. This is basically just the 2nd and 7th ranks, and these are also pretty good because you have some strong diagonals to attack the king or any other piece, and you can try to pull some discovered attacks. So let's see. If we move our queen there, and that's simply it. And now kingside castling is safer than queenside castling. The reason that is because when you actually kingside castle, that's because there's actually 4 pawns in front, and generally one of those pawns is already moved to make space for the queen. So this diagonal here is exposing the king, and this a3 pawn is also pretty much for free. And also another thing that you should know when castling on opposite sides, like in this position, when casting on opposite sides, it's basically just a race who can get an attack quickly. That's just a little tidbit of information for anyone who didn't know. But anyway, we did check out what happens if we castle on the queen side. These pawns are all alone, making it exceedingly hard to attack, and this a2 pawn is about to leave, meaning this bishop can easily just take. So we castle on the king side, making it much safer. And because these pawns are also a lot closer, and queenside castling definitely feels a lot looser, mostly because of the lots of exposed diagonals. Now it says if you're behind in development, don't open the position. This is very simple because when you're behind in development, you don't have all of your pieces completely ready to go and ready to attack. So whenever that happens, don't open the position, because then whoever has the most pieces in play will benefit. That's just simply a rule of thumb. And again, this blurb seems to be very long, so let's skim through it. It says, it is very common to open or close a position. The question is, when should I open or close the position? Here's the answer. You can only open a position when you win development. That is, if you have more pieces developed on the board, you must advance your pawns with the intention of opening the position. In simple, when you open a position with your pawns and pieces, it makes it much easier to attack. And the other player want to close a position that is convenient for them to close a position when you're behind in development. So let's see. In this position of the Roy Lopez, white has a better development of the pieces while black is behind, so it is convenient to open the position. This position is normally open with the pawns. How can we open the positions? Let's see. We have bishop takes, but that's not right. So what we can do is actually playing pawn to d4. This knight actually cannot take because it is pinned. And if this pawn takes, the knight can take back. And this knight is in some hot water. And don't change a part. I guess it should say piece if it's not developed. The 10th and last advice and rule that you must know is to have a good game in the opening is that you should not change it's exchange the developed piece for a non-developed one. This basically means that you should only exchange your inactive pieces or pieces that aren't doing very much, like they're not attacking or controlling many squares, with pieces from your opponent that actually do control a lot of squares. Because those, if you can get rid of your opponent's active pieces, it makes it a lot harder for your opponent to attack or defend, all at the same time while you're only making minimal losses. So let's see, we know that we shouldn't trade our bishop here, which is on f4, with that bishop on b8, simply because this knight hasn't even come off the 8th rank. It's not controlling or really protecting any important squares. And if you see our bishop, it's attacking on h6, which can be used later if queen comes to g4 to try to deliver checkmate or an attack. Or it's even controlling this really long diagonal from h2 to b8. So there's many opportunities for this bishop, so we don't want to waste it. So it's a little octopus here from Licha says we should not trade our bishop for that knight. But just to show you why this is not a good idea, let's play bishop takes on b8. So basically this is just displaying what happens. So now we lost basically just the very good bishop on f4, which I explained all the pros, because it has the long diagonal and it has the ability to attack the h6 pawn, all for some boring old knight on b8, which isn't even doing anything. Just a horrible idea. And that's basically just the last tip. I hope this video helped anybody who is looking for any help in their opening. And bye, stay safe, and see you later.